Nancy_Park. Welcome to the BFG Army.
G'day guys, and welcome to the Battleforged Gaming podcast, episode 20.
Ooh.
Yeah, I believe that puts us in the 1% of podcasts now because not many people get to 20 episodes in a row.
You've made it.
Yeah, we've made
done
it.
it.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Nice.
We're done.
Yeah,
Very nice.
Get the trophy, the podcast trophy.
Yep. This is brought to you by General Games in Chirnside Park. So thanks to those guys for supporting the podcast. And with that, we do have a giveaway with an epic model for Warhammer. So if you like and comment on episodes 19 and 20 of the
There you
podcast,
go.
so the previous one we did with Alex and this one with Ben,
Yep.
then you have a chance to go in the draw to win a hero model up to a 60mm base. So that's like a Primarch model,
Mhm.
Far Sight.
Okay.
Have you got Commander Far Sight yet?
Can I comment on my own episode? Can
100%
All
you
right.
can. 100%
I'll go in
you
the
can.
draw. Yeah, let's do this.
So we've got BFG Mark with us, and we've got Ben from Ghostfire Gaming.
Hey,
Hello.
I was looking up the name. I'm like, I'm going to say something else. but I actually got it. So
That's a cool name. I like it.
it is
no,
very,
you've done well. We
it's
get
very
Ghostfire
good.
Games a lot, and
Yeah.
every time somebody does that, we're always like, oh, it's gaming.
Yeah.
But, you know.
So we'll jump into the fortnightly catch up, which I mean, we've never met Ben, so you've got a massive fortnightly catch up. What have you
Yeah.
been up to recently, Mark?
I'm currently putting together 50 battle line units of my Tyranids. So 10 Hormagaunts, 30 Termagants, and 10 Gargoyles. And then I'm going to batch paint those. So I'm a lot of cleaning of the plastics and stuff at the moment. So that's going to.
You're going to batch paint 50 models?
Yeah, I am.
Wow. People jump on stream and call me a sucker for paint doing all my black edge highlights. Batch painting 50 models is
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah,
It
it's
literally
going to
never occurred to me until right now, though. But I've been thinking of Tyranids because I'm like, they'd be like just contrast paint them, dry brush them, make it really easy.
No,
But now that you've mentioned the assembly, I'm like, nah, fuck that. Like, no way.
yours, the gargoyles are older molds, so
Yes.
they've
Right.
definitely got more mold lines on them. And
Yes.
did you pick up older gargoyles? Older Hormagaunts and Termagants?
So 10 of the Termagants will be from Leviathan.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
So
and,
they'll be-
and then the Hormagaunt. I noticed on the Hormagaunts, they're actually not too bad, these ones. So
Right.
I might
That's
have got
good.
lucky, but
But
then
you
20 of them.
can definitely, like, I dry brushed the basically the Leviathan box for an event. So you can dry brush it and contrast the carapace and stuff and get them done pretty quickly.
The carapace will take me a while with it.
How
I've got
long
4.
did I do them? It didn't take that long. It was like 800 points in 135 hours or something like that.
Yeah, you did really well
Which-
with those.
Which is the same as sort of 2 of the Imperial Knights I did. the little ones. And I'm still going. So thank you for coming on the podcast.
No,
Ben.
thanks for having
Appreciate
me.
it. Appreciate it. What have you been up to recently in the past fortnight?
I feel like I'm just opening myself up to get bullied here, but I've been working on Tau. It's my gateway army into 40k or reintroduction to 40k because I played when I was a kid. I agonized a lot over the decision at the start of the year. I was looking at 3 different armies and then finally
what were
settled
the
on
top
Tau.
3?
Top 3 were Eldar, Necrons, both of which I collected as a teenager.
Yeah.
And then Tau was kind of the third.
So all Xenos. And then
yeah, I'm complete Xenos.
and now Tyranids.
And now
is-
Tyranids. Yeah, I occasionally like look at a Space Marine and I'm like,
I respect that. I
maybe.
respect it.
But not. There's definitely a pattern. I think I like the high tech kind of looking armies.
So that's
Yeah.
what drew you to the tower.
Yeah. I mean, Tau came out when I was first collecting back in 2003, 2000 something like that.
Yep.
And instantly was like, Eldar, what? Like, Tau, they look sick. I never got into them back then, so now I'm kind of like making up for lost time. But yeah, I'm halfway through a combat patrol. I think I've got about 9 minis left. Ghost Kill is done, so that's the big one out of the way. I just
I've
finished
actually
that
got
today.
a picture of the ghost kill. You won't be able to see it, and neither will you, but I can bring it up for the people that are watching. If I hide this one.
Your painting is insane.
There we
Oh,
go.
thank
So
you.
for the people watching, that is Ben's ghost kill right there. And you would have seen some other ones, which we will chat about as well. They were sort of up before the ghost kill. So that's the scheme you're going with, that sort of grayish blue.
Yeah, it's honestly like path of least resistance. I found the scheme on YouTube. I was like, that dark kind of blue looks cool. They kind of look a little cyberpunky. Let's try that.
Yep.
And I was using Dark Reaper for the base coat. And when I was doing my first test mini, two things happened. First, I realized I was going to have to do like 2 or 3 layers of the Dark Reaper. It's not super opaque. And I was like, oh no, this is just like tripled the time it's going to take to paint
for
these.
For dark color, it doesn't cover that well.
No, I was shocked. Yeah, I was really surprised. And the second thing was when I showed my wife the first Fire Warrior I did, she was like, he's just black. Well, you haven't done anything to him. And I was like, oh, okay, I've obviously got to up it a bit. Yeah, so I went for
the cheerleading from the wife whatsoever.
Nah.
Just brutal honesty.
No. She keeps me honest. She makes sure I get the best army that I can have on the table. So yeah, I went the speckled kind of camo look because honestly, it was just easy to speckle them really, really quickly, get them done quick, do some edge highlighting to make it look a bit cleaner, and I can get probably 4 Fire Warriors done in a weekend, and that's kind of my goal at the moment. So
it's not bad. That's good.
It's a good goal.
Yeah.
So touching on the 2003, was it?
Yeah, ish.
That was your first. That's when you first got into Warhammer. So we'll jump into Ben's origin story now because that's a pretty good starting point. And you do a lot of D&D. What came first?
Warhammer came first. Yeah, my older brother collected Black Templars back in the day, and then right as he was getting out of it, I found his Templars in the shed and was just like, you know what, these are pretty cool. I might take a look at these, and got into Eldar. With a mate of mine, we started collecting, both of us were Eldar first, and then he went into what was Imperial Guard at the time, and I got into Necrons, and we did that for about 4 or 5 years through high school, and then it was just moving town, fell out of the hobby, didn't have anywhere to set up and do it because we moved from like a big house to a small apartment when we moved into the city, and slowly sold it all off as I got into D&D maybe 5, 6, 7 years later. And so it's really interesting because like D&D has become a large part of my hobby journey. It's my profession. Ghostfire Gaming is like a third-party D&D company.
For people that don't know, Ben has a YouTube channel, Ghostfire Gaming.
Yeah, Ghostfire Gaming is a YouTube channel.
I'll put a link in the YouTube once we upload it. And so what drew you to creating a YouTube channel with your D&D? What was the initial sort of leap into doing it?
Yeah, it's an interesting long story, but I'll try and give you the cliff notes, which was
we like long stories though.
Long stories. Well, buckle up. Here we go. It was 1976. No,
it was a good year, that one.
I was in my mid-20s. I just finished doing a master's in education. I got into teaching and never wanted to be a teacher, but that's just kind of where I landed, and was like, all right, I've got a fiance, I've got a job, I'm kind of set up now. Like, what happens? Do I win at life? Like, I'm kind of done, in terms of like setting myself up. Got to start saving for a house, I guess.
Yeah.
And got into D&D just out of sheer boredom. And was getting up. I was a casual relief teacher, which for those that don't know, being a CRT, you get up in the morning and kind of pretend like you're going to go to work because you don't know if you're going to get a shift or not. Yeah. But if you don't get ready to go and you get a call, it's just a mad dash. So what I would do is get up and start working on my D&D campaign after having breakfast and getting dressed. And if I had a day to go to teach, I'd do that, or I'd stay and work on my D&D campaign. Had a tradie come through, see all my miniatures and stuff for D&D laid out on my table. And he's like, oh, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm working on my D&D campaign. He's like, you get paid for that? I was like, no. But I should.
So did you get into D&D with friends, or was it just you boys?
It was my brother as well, again. Yeah. He kind of he's introduced me, and I know this is probably a pretty common story, but he's introduced me to a lot of my hobbies. Video games was another thing that I kind of took after him in. And we have slightly different tastes in terms of why we're into different hobbies. He's a mini painter first, and a war gamer a distant second.
Yeah. Right. That was going to be one of the major questions: painter or gamer, or both. It's looking at your stuff, I'm feeling like it's a bit of both now.
It is a little bit of both. I think it's honestly I paint to play. I don't paint many minis if I'm not going to use them on the battlefield, or I don't have a specific kind of technique or something I want to try. But when I say battlefield, I also mean like in D&D, like if I'm going to throw it down on the table for my party to fight.
And I've got an image of I think one of your little D&D campaigns, if I can bring it up.
Oh yeah, what's this one?
It looks like there's a giant lizard on the board, a big crocodile. I might be able to turn. Here we go. I've got that image.
Oh
there.
yeah,
That's
cool.
Is that D&D or is that something else?
That's D&D. I mean, we're using like tiles and stuff from Descent, but there's some Warhammer minis on that. The skeletons are Games Workshop, because I kind of grab a little bit of everything.
That's the fantastic thing about D&D, isn't it? You can use basically anything you want for it.
It was meant to be a cheap hobby when I first got into it, because I was like, you just need dice and books, right? And then away you go. But because of my wargaming background, because the miniatures was the thing I love about, hobbying and playing tabletop games, like that just drew me back. It was almost like magnetism, like a long journey back to GW from being a teenager, because I started getting Reaper Bones minis and I was like, yeah, these are nice. But have you seen the Night Haunts? Like those are sick.
Yeah.
And yeah, you just kind of grabbing what I thought looked cool until eventually I was like, all right, I guess I'm getting back into Warhammer.
Does your wife play any of the tabletop games with you?
She plays D&D with us.
Yep.
She's in my weekly D&D campaign and loves that. I managed to get her to play a bit of Warhammer Underworlds because it was kind of quick and easy. It's like a 90-minute game, so she enjoyed
the
that.
opposite of D&D.
Yeah, exactly. 40K, she likes to make fun of me because when we first met was in like 2009 and I still had the remnants of my Elder and Necrons. And like on one of our third dates, I was like, you want to play D&D? Like, this will be fun. Let's play D&D together. And she has since told me that she was not into the idea of it whatsoever. Playing Warhammer, sorry. I just said D&D. And so I have this memory of like having my Necrons and my Elder trying to explain to her 3rd edition Warhammer 40K rules.
Which was arguably more complicated than 10th edition.
Yeah, it's interesting getting into 10th. I'm having like flashbacks back to 3rd and 4th and being like, oh yeah, I remember how this worked back then. It was this way. Like flamer templates and vehicle armor facing and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and seeing how those have been translated into modern rules where I'm like, I remember an Elder Brightlance kind of could damage a Land Raider on a 4+ because it was strength 8.
Reduce any armor to 12.
That's right. That's what it did. That's why I could do that. Yeah. And seeing how they kind of translate that into the new everything has wounds rules, which kind of messes with my head a little bit, but I'm like, okay, I get it. I think I'm okay with it.
Yeah, they basically, what they did was they wanted to take away a little bit of the randomness of the game.
Sure.
So, I feel like it was for more of the competitive side. Yeah. So people were going to tournaments and you'd put a flamer template down and your opponent would be like, oh, you're only hitting 6 of the models. And you're like, well, I reckon I'm hitting 8.
Right.
So they sort of sped it up with that. And then the armor facings, that was contentious too.
Yeah.
I'm shooting your side armor. And then someone would come over and be like, no, that's my front armor. Yeah. So they tried to take away a bit of that.
Take out the just makes it solid.
It essentially speeds the process up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because that's basically what I'm missing is like I got in at 3rd, played 4th. I think 5th was coming out right as I was kind of wrapping up. And then there's like missing DNA of how the game's evolved through like 6th, 7th, 8th.
Well, I think from my knowledge, because I didn't play any 5th, I came in at 6th.
Yeah, right.
So 6th and 7th were very similar to 5th. And I think 5th wasn't that far from 4th.
Yeah.
In terms of rules. Most of your rules were in the rule book. Like you had to look up all that type of stuff. And minimal rules were in your codex. Where now it's the opposite.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Most of your rules are in your codex.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to read what's on the war scroll or the
that's right.
the
I do remember
slate.
that. Yeah, I do remember that now.
Yeah. So Warhammer was no go with the wife, but
yeah, no, unfortunately. Yeah, and then after being into D&D for a couple of years, eventually just through pure luck, I started running my own company where we were running D&D for hire, just basically DM for hire kind of service. We're running at Fortress in Melbourne. There's still an event going. I'm not involved in it anymore, but it's called Dungeons and Flagons on a Sunday. Some friends of mine still run that. And then while I was there, literally I was just running that event and two guys called me over. They were like, hey, do you want to come have a chat? And I was like, yeah, sure. They're like, what's all this? And I'm like, oh, I run D&D. Are you guys interested in playing? They're like, actually, we run a D&D company. Do you want to come out and see our office? And I was like, okay. And I go back to my wife. I'm like, hey, her name's Tori, so I don't have to keep calling her my wife.
My wife.
My wife. Yeah, exactly. I go back to her and I'm like, hey, I was just at Fortress running that event and two guys called me over and they like run this D&D company. They want me to go out to their office. She's like, okay, why? I was like, I don't know.
It's actually crazy how all that type of stuff works, the networking. Like, if you never put yourself in the position to do it, like.
But it just shows that you can lure a hobbyist, can't you? The two guys have come up to you and said, do you want to come see my D&D models? And you were all for it.
Yeah. Well, I did my research. I looked at the company online and then, because this was during, this was 2021, so we were going in and out of lockdown a lot when we were doing those snap lockdowns. So when I was meant to go out there, we got snap lockdown, so I had to meet them online. Had like a 2-hour conversation with them, just, you know, almost like this, just shooting the shit and talking D&D and video games and stuff. I got off the call. I went down to Tori. I was like, they seem really cool. We like all the same games and they're really into D&D and they want to play it dark fantasy style and that's really cool.
They just need my credit card
details. Yeah, exactly. Well, she was like, well, what do they want? I was like, I don't know. But they still want to meet me. Anyway, to cut a longer story short, eventually what they were looking for was a sort of community manager, social media dude to do podcasting and YouTube video content for them. So that's how I ended up in that role. But then D&D went from being a hobby to a job. And that's when eventually I flipped back to Infinity first and then Warhammer 40K more recently because, you know, if you make your hobby your job, you need another hobby to get away from that, you know? So that's something I learned. I tried to do commission painting for all of like 6 weeks and was immediately like, I need this for me. I can't do it for someone else.
Yeah. It takes a special person to do commission painting. It really, really does.
Yeah.
So you touched on Infinity.
Yeah.
Which have some absolutely phenomenal models. I painted a little bit of Infinity. Would have been 5 or 6 years back.
Yeah, okay.
House of War opened and they had just like racks and racks of Infinity.
Yeah,
I was like, I've never seen this before. I've never heard about it. All the metal, they're all metal models. Are they still metal?
No, they've changed to like they've started because the price of tin or something went up. I'm not going to tell that story super well, but there was something about like during pandemic years, it became really expensive to still produce metal miniatures. And Corvus Belli, the company, I believe, don't take my word on any of this, but they had said like, we'll always do metal, we'll never go to plastic. And they've been forced to economically. So what they've started doing is producing, it's got a name, but it's not hard plastic like what GW is. It's kind of like a soft, slightly flexible. I find it to be kind of gummy. I don't really like it.
Almost a resin type.
Yeah, it's thermoplastic, I think is what it's called. And I don't love it. And they got a lot of flack for it. They've started producing a lot of their larger minis in it instead of the metal. It makes once you've got a painted mini, like I wouldn't want one of these dudes in metal, right? Because you could like murder someone with that. Yeah. So the tags in Infinity, even though they're smaller than a ghost kill, they're still pretty heavy when they're metal. So, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages, but, how did you find Infinity? Like, how did you find painting it compared to 40K?
I picked very similar models to Space Marines anyway.
Sure.
I think it was the Yu Jing or something.
Yeah, okay.
The orange guys.
Yeah.
And
I remember you painting those, actually.
They were basically power armor.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I know how to paint this. But I tried doing blending and that type of stuff.
Sure.
I actually really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
Did the scale mess with you at all, or you were pretty happy?
No, not really.
Okay.
Nah, because I've painted some Necromunda stuff, which is smaller than Space Marines anyway. Sure. Yeah, I was okay with the scale of it, and I think I picked the larger guys anyway.
Yeah,
it was sort of the
Invincible Army.
I think so.
Yeah, power armored.
Yeah, big rail guns on their shoulders and stuff.
Yeah.
So they were larger models.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you jump into Infinity? Did you game? Did you do any gaming with it at all?
Yeah. I've played a ton of Infinity. Never really tournament play. I'm not super tournament minded. I actually got scared out of tournaments playing X-Wing of all things.
Right.
Which I
Just
played
too sweaty.
Yeah, well, basically the bad experience playing X-Wing, and this was first edition X-Wing, which I was into for about a year before D&D, and people used to play at Games Lab in the city when that was open. It was like every Monday night X-Wing was on. Went and did it was more than an introductory game because I'd been playing for a while, but I played this dude and beat him pretty concisely, and he was like, oh, man, you really kicked my ass. And I was like, I guess so, yeah. He's like, yeah, man, well done. You want to play again? And I was like, sure, all right. And he's like, I'm gonna try a bit of a different list.
Oh,
and I'm
yeah, all right. I'm just
okay.
going to tailor to what you just brought.
Yeah, he just absolutely smashed me. I could see the rage in his eyes at that initial loss, you know, like how dare this newbie come in here and beat me at my own game. And then there were a couple of other sort of weird experiences with X-Wing as a game. Kind of, it didn't matter what you rolled on the dice. It was just kind of like, well, because of this and that and this, everything hits. So you suck, I guess. And that was more a problem with the game than it was necessarily the community. But because of that, I've been really reluctant to go back to tournaments. It's kind of made me a bit gun shy about being in similar situations where.
So the game itself, you could sort of, I'm guessing the same as how Warhammer models have abilities, they could buff each other. Is that what you're saying? And it just kind of broke the game with what you could do?
It was stuff like, so they used D8s, which are like the diamond-shaped dice, but they were unique dice to X-Wing. And this was first edition. It might have changed in the second edition that they did. But basically there was a blank result, which was just nothing. Yeah. There was focus, I think it was called, which was like an eye result. There was hit, and then there was critical hit, and they were all different symbols. But you would have rules that would be like, turn any blank result you roll into a focus, and then you could spend a currency to turn a focus into a hit. And then you might have like some other rule that says, you know, any focus you've got turn into a hit up to 3. So it would literally get to a point where if you had the right upgrades on your ships and the right pilots and things, it literally just didn't matter what you rolled. You just like roll whatever, roll the dice and just be like, all right, well, I'm going to get at least 3 crits on this. And it's just like, okay, so there's no, it wasn't even taking the randomness out of it. It was just deciding results from the start of the game.
Just got to do some technical camera stuff.
No, you're right.
Okay, yeah. So it kind of, it sounds like it broke it, which you wouldn't want to play a game where there's no.
Yeah, it was kind of, X-Wing was a weird game, kind of like Warhammer Underworlds was. To my understanding, Underworlds has changed a little bit as well, but it was like a card game and a miniature war game at the same time.
Okay, yep.
And because of that, like Magic the Gathering has the advantage of being able to rotate cards out of the competitive scene, right?
Yes.
X-Wing didn't have that because of their business model was like selling cards with miniatures, which made it hard to rotate cards out. So as they were introducing more upgrades and features into the game, there were just these combos that would crop up that they couldn't really do anything about, you know, which made it really hard. But that being said, I have heard that the Warhammer competitive scene here in Melbourne is pretty friendly. So maybe I should just dive back in.
It is.
There's always going to be those people in the hobby, but that's why the hobby has, I think, you know, people that aren't into this kind of hobby look into it and they expect, especially you see it on cartoons and movies and stuff, they expect them to be everyone's overweight. That kind of thing. That's what the stigma is, I believe, with Warhammer as well. Because I know for myself, when I tell people that I paint Warhammer, they're just like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a stigma, I think, still with tabletop gaming. It's getting better in board games, but I still think for outside people, I think there's a bit of a stigma.
I'm a firm believer that your hobbies are your interests, and you should just do whatever you, 100%. You believe.
So do I think
you're interested in. So
yeah.
But the tournament scene, we were chatting briefly with Lockie when he came in. The casual gamer it seems knows more about the game than what they used to. So the lists, the way the games are getting played are a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
But you can still find the right it's all about finding the right people to sort of play against.
Well, does the fact that a casual gamer can find it easier to be competitive in 40K these days, do you think that's a result of like more exposure to advice and things through social media, or do you think it's because the game is simplified, so it's easier to build strong lists?
I think it's a bit of both. Where in 6th edition, when I got into the hobby, there wasn't a tremendous amount of hobby stuff on social media. It was it was probably there, but not to the extent it is now. So there's like War Games Live that live stream like the biggest tournaments in America. Like that's all he does. So he goes to tournaments. So you see. He generally has the top table, what's considered the top table. So the guys that are leading everyone else. So you tend to see the best armies getting played, the best lists, and people who know how to use those lists. And so people will just jump on and you're like, oh, gee, I want to learn how to play my Black Templar. And you might find a Wargaming's live stream or one of his previous videos where Black Templar are playing. And there's combos that you probably didn't know about. And then all of a sudden Mark's Tyranids he wasn't sure about. He's seen some video where a guy's got like a crazy combination. He's like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. And for the most part, I watch a little bit of Lockie stuff, and my lists I like to put maybe 1 or 2 units in there that combine well and can do some damage, because I don't want to get wiped off the tabletop. But at the same time, I don't want my opponent to just walk over me and be like, oh, cool, that was easy.
Yeah. I'm a little bit in the same space, and this is why I really struggled to like choose an army, is because I am competitive. I think that's part of the reason I've been scared away from the tournament scene, is because I'm not going to net list and ensure that I'm going to, crush every opponent. Yeah. But I feel it's like one of my personality traits I hate the most is just that feeling of like competitiveness.
As soon as you start rolling dice.
Yeah, exactly. Or like you have a unit get wiped and you're just like, I wanted those guys. I needed those. Just being cool with losing a unit is something that I think every wargamer needs to start with if they're not cool with it from the start. And playing a lot of Infinity, that game's like a massive puzzle, right? And you can lose a dude so easily. And if your opponent's set up to be able to see where you're going to move.
Yeah, it's like Overwatch and stuff. They just basically... If you move a dude, they're just like, I haven't used my action points on this guy.
Well, when it's not your turn, you can always react to your opponent who moves if they move a unit out in front of you. So if they have a well-positioned sniper, it can be really hard to move across the field because that sniper's going to get as many shots at you as it wants to take. It's only on your own turn that you're limited by orders in terms of how many actions you can take. So it means that you've got to be really, really careful. Whereas 40K, I think we were talking before, it's more like chess. You got to trade pieces. So
that was the hard part for me.
Yeah.
Trading 100 hours of painted models. Ooh, gee.
Well, I'm also like a story guy, right? So I'm like thinking these fire warriors are giving their lives to hold this objective, and it's for the greater good. And if they die, every life lost is a tragedy. And that just doesn't play well with that sense of competitiveness, because you start to take it too personally when you're like, but he had a family, and like, why are you murdering these guys?
So you started with Warhammer and then got into D&D with Ghostfire Gaming, and it's more than just you, Ghostfire Gaming?
Yeah, Ghostfire is a whole team of people. So we're actually a publishing company, not a media company. So we produce third-party books for D&D.
So is it like expansions to the game and stuff?
Yeah, basically. Imagine if like you were able to, I'm trying to think of how to analogize
a DLC
this.
From a video game.
Pretty much, yeah. Like imagine if GW had a license so that I could create an army for 40K and I could sell that army in a sort of semi-official way. I wouldn't be able to say it's for Warhammer, but maybe I could say it's for like 40K or something like that. Yeah. Because I don't, Warhammer 40K is an IP, but using the kind of offhand 40K, you're allowed to sell it. That's kind of what the situation is with D&D, because we can publish content. We can't say it's Dungeons and Dragons, but we can tell people that it's 5th edition compatible, which tells them that they can use it with their D&D books. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of kind of change and stuff that's happened in the D&D and in the tabletop RPG industry over the last 12 months. But that's kind of what Ghostfire's main bread and butter is producing books. Our kind of flagship IP is Grim Hollow, which is dark fantasy. It's very inspired by things that inspire Warhammer as well, which is, like The Witcher and Berserk and those sort of dark fantasy tales.
Very cool.
And so, yeah, my role is basically coming in and being a fan of our content and just then getting online and being like, all right, you want to run a campaign that's all about vampires? Here's how to take the rules that we've created for vampires in Grim Hollow and use them in your game. And here's the advice that I'm going to give you for your 5e game. So it's kind of similar to what the Warhammer TV crew do, in terms of giving like painting advice, hobby tips, that sort of thing.
Except you've got a face. And
Yeah. It's not just my hands doing like a puppet show going like, what are we going to do this week?
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Yeah. There's personality behind.
Yeah, exactly.
What made you get back into Warhammer? Like, was it sort of the D&D stuff? Like, you're like, oh, I want those skeletons for D&D, and then and then obviously you've made the fatal error of stepping inside a Games Workshop.
Yeah, basically that. I was grabbing miniatures for D&D. A lot of folks when they play D&D, the love for miniatures is like really varying depending on who you talk to.
Yep.
Some people are happy to use like little D4s as their miniatures. Some people use lollies or coins or whatever. I have a specific sickness, which is not only do I need miniatures, but I need miniatures of the specific monster you are going to be fighting. I'm not happy putting goblins down if you're fighting elves. I need elf miniatures if you're going to be fighting elves.
No, I'd be exactly the same.
Yeah. And I think that's most war gamers would be, right? Because that's what you're used to. And like even in wargaming, I'm not opposed to proxying, but I like to know what I'm looking at when I'm looking at it on the battlefield. You know what I mean?
You want WYSIWYG.
A little bit, yeah. Like my Infinity Army is 012. I've got a bunch of samurai ninja dudes with the katanas in there, which are from a different army. I say they're proxied as these dudes, these Varangian guys who are close combat experts. That's what they are all the time. So my opponent has that reliability in terms of board readability.
Yeah.
So I don't mind proxying in that way if you just really like a miniature or you're doing converting or kit bashing or something like that. But just as long as that miniature makes sense for what it's meant to be on the battlefield, then
it'd be similar to how I want to run my Stern Guard when I want to run them. They've got two different bolter profiles.
Yeah.
And in the Leviathan box, they're cheeky. They give you like 2 Stern Guard bolters, and then everyone else has a combi bolter. I was just like, man, I just want all combi bolters. So I picked up another box of Stern Guard, the multi-part kit, and then I built all combi bolters for them. So when I play my opponent, and I've got a 10-man squad, but there's 2 Stern Guard bolter in there, be like, just so you know, this whole unit is just combi bolters.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was just getting more miniatures, getting wood elves, getting skeletons. Got into Warhammer Underworlds that way because you'd get those little war bands that would give you kind of 5-6 miniatures, and that's all you kind of needed for D&D.
It's the little gateway drug.
It really was, yeah. And then
they're clever with how they do it. You're just like, oh, I'll just dip my toe in. I'll just get a war cry. That's not that big. I'll just get like 1 box and I'll be sweet. And then you get the war cry box and you're like, oh, wait, hang on. I could play these in Age of Sigmar.
Yeah.
What's that big monster?
Yeah.
You can use that monster. Well, it's not going to hurt if I just get him.
Yeah, definitely. I get stuck in that rabbit hole. I'm the same as you. I love lore. Sure. So I love reading into stuff, and then I'll read something about another army. I'm like, oh, I want to paint that guy. He sounds so cool.
So lore's a big motivator for you wanting to paint specific models?
Yes. Yeah, lore. I like the lore behind things. I like Xenos as well, but that's because I think I just like in most movies and stuff, the humans always end up winning.
Sure, yeah.
I'd like to see movies where it doesn't end that way.
So well, I mean, not in the 40K universe.
Yeah, well, and that's what I mean.
Everyone loses.
Yeah. So with the tabletop, if I can play Xenos or the enemies and they actually win, it's kind of like, this is a bit realistic because the good guys aren't always going to win. So
I mean, who are the good guys in 40K?
Yeah, that's I just see Tau.
It is basically Tau. It is basically Tau. Yeah.
Well, here's a question for you though, because I was thinking about this before coming on the show, which is like, what is my motivation for painting minis sometimes, as opposed to playing with them? And this is very true for D&D, because you think in D&D, okay, they're going down into a crypt where a vampire lives, and they're going to fight a wraith that is made of the blood of the victims of this vampire, you know?
Is this the wraith that got featured?
This is the Banshee that got featured on the GW store, yeah.
I've got a picture of this one.
Ooh. I just, honestly, I wanted to paint something that looked like it was from Crimson Peak, that movie. Yeah. The ghosts in that movie just scared the bejesus out of me. They're so effective. They're so like distorted and weird looking. But that like deep crimson red color that they are is also really disturbing. And I was just like, well, I'm going to get a Tomb Banshee and try and do that.
So the Tomb Banshee was for a D&D campaign?
It was for a D&D campaign, yeah. And when I posted it on my Instagram, maybe a week later or something, I got a message through Instagram from GW.
I've been trying for 6 years to get a message from GW.
I don't know, like... I'm glad that I've got a photo, not just of the Tomb Banshee, but I took a photo, like a screenshot on my phone of the GW store page, because it was featured in the Tomb Banshee like listing, but then I think they stopped showing kind of community painted work like 6 months to a year later, so it disappeared.
Yeah, so this was if someone searched up a Tomb Banshee and they scrolled down the bottom, they had links to people's Insta photos of those specific models. Yeah. That was actually a real, like, that sort of feature was very cool.
Yeah, I thought so too. It'd give you lots of ideas about, like, what are some alternative ways to paint this model that it isn't just, you know, box art or the different variations of. But where I was kind of going with that story was thinking about story when I'm painting miniatures, and the miniature has to make sense to me when I'm converting, adding bits to it, painting it. The reason I'm doing red in the Tau guns as kind of a gun glow isn't just because it looks good with the blue, but I've thought about like, okay, so the fusion blaster is a heat-based weapon, so they're kind of firing it up and it looks all kind of orange on the inside. Are you ever thinking about stuff like that when you're choosing colors for your minis?
100%. So with my,
your Tyranids, yes, the ones that are painted to produce seizures, is that what they do?
My first ever game of Warhammer was against someone with epilepsy, and with mine. So the pink was, to be honest, the pink skin was a joke, right, to start off with, because Judd loves pink Necrons.
Oh yeah,
so.
Now I know what to paint my Necrons.
I made the joke of, hey, man, what if I paint pink Tyranids? And Judd turned around. He's like, yeah, okay, man, do it. And I was like, I don't reckon he's going to like if I do this. And then I did one. And Judd actually gave me a few heads of spare Carnifex heads that he had. So I did some samples. And I was like, do you know what's actually really cool? I do like these colors. So what's going to glow? But going on the whole lore with painting it. So my Tyranids have blue eyes. And the brains are blue on them. And the reason behind that is because Tyranids run off a synapse.
Right.
So my synapse with my Tyranids is blue. So that's why their eyes glow blue, the brains glow blue, and the weapons and the plasma glows blue, because it's all connected to that sort of neurosystem. So yes, I definitely paint now, making up my own lore and stuff like that. Like I'm going to do Old One Eye for my army, which is one of the Tyranids characters. And I'm actually going to, because his lore is, they don't know if he keeps coming back or if it's a new One Eye, that the Imperium can't figure out what's happening. So I'm actually going to paint my One Eye a mix of the actual One Eye that GW painted and a mix of mine, because I'm having it that, yes, the Tyranids have come, they've found the corpse of him, but because of how he works, he's become a part of my army,
right?
And so that's where the color change is coming in. So things like that. I now paint the claws bone color too, because I'm doing that because my thing behind the Tyranids is once their weapon merged with them, because a weapon is a symbiote, that's actually caused their bones to pierce through the skin to create their weapons that they have. Right. So yeah, I'd like to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Because I'm like in deciding between, when I got back into 40K at the start of the year, Eldar, Necrons, Tau, I have an idea for an Elder army based on a white paint scheme that I saw online. It was kind of like Beal tannish, but didn't paint the helmets green. They left it white as well.
Oh, okay.
And did like purple eyes and gems and things. And I was like,
I think I know which one you're talking about too. I can't for the life of me remember who painted it, but I reckon I know which one you're talking about.
yeah, it's super cool. And I think he had it based on a jungle base as well, which kind of the white was really stark in among the kind of foliage and greenery, and then like other pops of color from the flowers and things. And it just made me think of like this craft world that's crashed into a planet, and the rest of the Eldari think that this craft world's done and dead and gone, but they've kind of turned the planet into an exodite planet, and they're known as the ghosts of Ilth, blah, 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 you know, some elder name, because they kind of appear like white ghosts out of the foliage, attack, kill, and disappear again. And that kind of just based on the paint scheme makes me go like, if I can tell a story with the paint scheme, that's kind of what gets me excited to paint as much as does it look cool, you know?
Yeah, that's very cool.
I paint blood angels because they look pretty. No, for me, when I started painting, it was purely based on, do I like the look of the model? Yeah, sure. That's how I first started painting, and it was really good for my skills because I was painting a heap because I was super motivated to paint. You know, when you're trying to paint an army and you're not overly enthusiastic about it, it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
So motivation is difficult, and that's where you have to turn it into a bit of dedication if you're wanting that army. And then it started to move into painting towards an army. So it was a combination of, I really like these models and I'd like them to be in an army. So now there sort of is a purpose behind why I paint specific models. So,
Sure.
And, you know, it takes me a long time, and time's valuable.
Yeah.
So especially when you're trying to create content based around it. So,
I mean, that's why I'll be honest, I was really hesitant to get back into 40K because it took me like 3 years to paint 32 Infinity models or something like that, right? Like I have really slow pace of painting. Painting for me, as I know you gents have talked on this podcast before, is meditative, but it is also a little bit of a chore where like if I paint for, 3 weeks, I kind of need to take 2-3 weeks of playing video games or doing something else instead to get away from it before coming back to it. Yep. And then I'll get into a place where I can't play video games because the motivation is literally driving me to the table to start painting again.
Yep.
So getting into 40K, knowing that like there's 32 models or something like that or 22 models in the Tower Combat Patrol, I remember saying this exact thing because the reason we did it is we got a Combat Patrol League kind of starting up, and there's 4 of us, 3 of us are table ready and 1 of us is still half assembled. But I said to the guy who was trying to convince me to do it, what I want is a fully painted Tower Combat Patrol. That'd be sick. Yeah, I want to play some Combat Patrol.
Yeah.
What I don't want is a cupboard in 12 months' time filled with half-assembled, half-painted Tau because I can't keep that motivation going.
Yeah.
And so what's keeping me going is the fact that I found this easy scheme. I can knock out 4 in a weekend. I'll have them done in like 2 months maybe. And then I'll start looking around and being like, okay, do I get another Combat Patrol or do I expand the Tau army?
Don't come to Tyranids.
Yeah, no.
Do you think sort of making a promise to yourself to do it helped you stay on track?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one promise that I had with my mate who I collect Infinity with was like, we will not play with unpainted minis. We will only play with painted minis, which led to its own problems of like wanting to try a certain list or a certain play style or a certain combination and feeling like we couldn't because, that miniature isn't painted.
Yeah.
Flip side is that kind of got you motivated to paint that miniature leading up to when you next had your next game day. But it was kind of a 2-pronged sword, or a double-edged sword, whatever the expression is. But with 40K, I kind of had to concede and say like, Yeah, okay. If I, it's already been 6 months since I bought the Combat Patrol, and I've had other things come up, and I've had Infinity Minis that I've been painting as well. So, even just getting to this point, I'm kind of on a roll, but I got to keep that motivation going. And if I go out and buy a Necron Combat Patrol now, I think that's just going to start to crash my motivation as I get overwhelmed by looking at how much plastic I've got in my cupboard.
Yeah, need a bit of impulse control.
Exactly. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm on like Facebook Marketplace every night seeing if anybody's selling some nuanced sprue Necrons or Elder or whatever, even Tau.
I do the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm always on eBay looking at Warhammer
It's
models.
almost like part of the hobby, right? It's an unspoken part of the hobby is like theory crafting lists or armies in your head or paint schemes, and then going onto marketplaces and looking who's selling what to see what you can get for a price that you can justify it to yourself. And like, I've collected Tyranids in my head like 10 times over the last 6 months, I've even looked at Tyranid armies on sale and gone like, yeah, maybe. But
without being devil's advocate, where are you going with them? Are we talking big bugs here or?
Look, honestly, I've been looking very Combat Patrol because it's focused and like I don't feel overwhelmed with it.
Yep.
I'm not diagnosed, but I definitely think I've got a bit of ADHD brain where if I'm presented with like too much information or too big a task, I just like shut down and say, no, I don't want to do that because I just feel overwhelmed. So every time I'm looking for things that are on sale, I'm always quickly checking, okay, does it have everything in the Combat Patrol here? And if it doesn't, then I'm like, nah, I'm not interested because I can start playing Combat Patrol like, as soon as they're assembled. If I'm buying the same amount of minis, but it's not in a Combat Patrol and I'm playing like a 500 point, I could probably still do it, but it doesn't feel as contained. It doesn't feel as easy to kind of slip into. And I know in Combat Patrol, in theory, or at least I've made this assumption, I'm sure a lot of folks are going to tell me I'm wrong about this, the lists are relatively balanced in theory, right? I don't have to worry about like some dude rocking up with some crazy list that's just going to wipe me because he's rock, paper, scissored me at the table, know?
Yeah. So having said that, do you think getting into the normal side of 40K is something you'll do, like gaming wise?
That's literally the next decision is like, get these Tau done, grab the Necrons, and even if it is just Combat Patrol to start with, it'll probably be a toe dip to see like which play style I prefer. I'm enjoying what I've played of the Tau so far, but I think I'll really enjoy the Necron staying power, which is what I've enjoyed from previous times.
There's one thing, because I've started with Tau too. There's one thing about Tau, and I think they've probably rectified what was one of my major issues was you used to participate in 2 phases of the game.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Move and shoot.
Yeah.
And that was it. And when there was like, back when there was a psychic phase and a combat phase and all that type of stuff, I'm like, man, I'm playing like half the game.
Sure.
And if you really enjoy Tau, I encourage people to do it. Like, don't not get Tau because I'm like, oh, you only move and shoot. But now there's crew. And crew are pretty cool. Handy in combat.
Well, let me ask you about like the game, because something I've noticed now, comparing it in my head to 3rd and 4th, but also comparing it to Infinity, something we didn't have in 3rd or 4th was are they command points? Is that what they're called in the current version of the game? And like being able to Overwatch and being able to, Tau have certain rules in the small amount I've played in Combat Patrol to participate in the combat phase by basically running away, right? But I get to move the ghost keel again because of X rule because I spend a command point, which makes the game feel much more dynamic than it did back in 3rd, where it literally was
more
just
involved.
The 3 phases. Yeah, exactly.
The strats are definitely allowing you to be, instead of just letting your opponent have their whole turn.
Yeah.
and you're just like sitting there being like, how many saves am I rolling? Now you've got reactions. So you can like defensively try and
it makes for more thought processing too, because once you play a bit more as well, if you know your opponent's got command points to be able to do things, you're sitting there going, I know that he's trying to keep this model on the field. I know he's got a command point for just say like Tyranids, I can give him feel no pain.
Yeah.
Some people go like I'll be shooting at that if it has that rule saying, oh no, I want to kill it. But if he activates that on it, there's less chance that I'm going to actually take that off the table. Maybe I should go for something else. So I think I definitely agree with it. Makes it a lot more dynamic.
There's also in turn is trying to a tactic in itself is trying to get your opponent to use their command points and trying to fish those command points out so you can target something else.
Yes.
So.
That got done to me the other week this is a really fun part of the game, honestly, is learning the strategy of when to use command points, when to react to your opponent. Playing Infinity or coming from that game and then playing 40K, I feel like I need to be reacting because in Infinity, you do need to be reacting to your opponent, right? Otherwise, you're just letting them get away with stuff.
Yeah.
But he had my opponent's playing Dark Elder. He moved one of his boats towards me, the Ravager, I think, with the one with the guns.
Yeah.
And he moved it deliberately because he was trying to tease out my Overwatch. And I was overconfident. I was like, I've got 2 Overwatches. I don't. It was some other rule that I confused. Tau have like an ability to shoot dudes when they charge at them or something for an extra command point, but it's a different stratagem, so you can kind of get away with 2 Overwatches is how it felt, but he completely teased me out. So I was just like, oh, damn, I shouldn't have been so trigger happy. Like how often should I be using command points?
Well, the more you play, the more you'll know.
Each army, I think, relies like differently on how to play them and use them, which is.
I tend to try and base my armies around not requiring CP. So if I've got the CP, it's fantastic. If I make a charge for my Blood Angels and I can use Red Rampage, that's really cool. But I try and play it so that that's not a necessity.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's cool. That's cool to know that like you can build armies differently around CP in terms of like, okay, my army's really CP heavy, but this is me assuming this, I have lots of ways to generate it, so therefore I can make better use of it, or I don't generate much CP, but I don't need it. Like that's really cool.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the sort of content that like is helpful for new players coming in, you know, to be able to learn that sort of stuff. Before they necessarily learn it at the table.
Speaking of new players, good segue. If there are people that are in D&D and they're looking to get into Warhammer, have you got any advice for those people?
Yeah, probably. It depends. Like you can always dive, 2 feet straight in and go for something bigger like a combat patrol or a full army. But I would also say that, and GW know this, we all know this, it's part of their business model, is those boxed games like Warhammer Underworlds are great because Warhammer Underworlds feels so story-driven. Every miniature is a character in that game.
Yeah.
And every miniature plays to their character. Their rules are meant to feel like that miniature at the table, so to speak. So it's an easy way to wrap your head around what's meant to be happening at the table and feel like you're playing a story like D&D without the overwhelm of suddenly having 30, 40 miniatures to paint before you get going. The other thing that's great about Underworlds, I think, is that you don't, and maybe this is sacrilege, you don't have to paint the miniatures.
Yeah.
Or at least you don't have to paint them to feel like you're having a good experience with the game because it's got that kind of board gamey vibe to it.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
So that could be a plus because painting it's so fascinating watching those two worlds collide. A couple of years ago, a company came out with D&D minis that were singles in a box and they were on sprue and they were like self-assembly. And in they were like 25 Australian dollars each. And in the Facebook groups, all the people who also played war games were like, sweet, $25 in sprue and I get spare parts. This is a great deal. And all the D&D players who don't play war games were like, that's expensive. No way. I'm not getting that. Why would I? And I have to put it together myself. So you've got to approach D&D players carefully if you're trying to push them towards war games.
Has D&D always had the board game aspect of it, or was that a thing that came in like with the miniatures? I mean, because when I first knew about D&D, I always knew it as that book with the open thing. And then once I started getting back into Warhammer, I noticed the miniatures, and I was like, I didn't know D&D had miniatures. And then that's got me fascinated. To D&D. So has it always had the miniature aspect to it as well? Or
I think so. It sort of plays like it's a very simplified use of a battle grid. You know, it's like squares, or you can use hexes instead if that's your preference.
But do models have like a movement they can move to like, you don't need to necessarily be close to a model to attack them, or
you do. So it's let's say I'm using like a melee weapon. The assumed reach of your melee attack is like 5 feet, right? Which is an inch on the table. But most D&D players, if they're playing with minis, because you don't have to play it with miniatures at all, which is why like a lot of people don't realize it uses minis, is it's almost like a mini agnostic war game in that way. You can kind of use anything to represent anything as long as, you know, it kind of looks like the thing it's meant to be representing. So if you're playing on like a 5 foot square grid where every square represents 5 feet, you've got to be you've got to be in the adjacent square to be able to make a melee attack against your opponent. Right. There are also rules that'll say stuff like there's a spell called Lightning Bolt, which says for 60 feet in front of you, a 5 foot wide bolt of lightning, you know, arcs, and everyone in that line has to take a save or they'll take damage.
Yeah.
And so some people, if they're playing without minis, it'll be like, okay, so like you guys are kind of standing in a line, so this is going to hit all three of you, but you're safe because I think you said you were off over there. Whereas if you play with it, not saying that it's bad to play without minis.
Yeah.
But if you're using the grid, suddenly it becomes a lot more tactile. You can see where everybody is. The rules feel a lot more concrete. And
it'd be a bit more immersive too, I'd imagine.
I think so. I mean, it depends. Like, and again, it's really interesting seeing people's different backgrounds and approaches to D&D as a game. People who don't come from a wargaming background will say that miniatures are less immersive because they're not imagining it in their mind. They're focused on what's on the table. Whereas myself and people that come from that wargaming side will say like, no, I want that painted miniature and the 3D scenery and, you know, the Dwarven Forge kind of, you know, mountains and castles and stuff. And that's immersive to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really depends.
Because you said before Ben turned up that you did a practice?
Dip my toes in the water with D&D. We got the starter book. My brother and our stepdad he wanted to get into it as well. Don't know if we're doing it right. It's the same as probably you going from D&D to Warhammer.
Yeah.
I've got the Warhammer rules in my head.
Yeah.
So when I'm reading the D&D, I think I'm looking at it wrong. But we played a game. We think we got it right. We still had fun and made it interesting. But what's the best way you reckon to get started with D&D?
Yeah. What's the opposite? What's the opposite for people that are
getting out of war games?
And they're like, I want to get into a D&D campaign. What's the best way to start? Do you need a bunch of friends?
Yeah, it is a really social game. That is one. I mean, so is wargaming, but wargaming.
I'm out then.
You're done.
I
can't deal with more than 3 people at a time.
Well, no, I just don't have 3 friends. So
yeah, fair enough. I think the first thing to note is like D&D is a really flexible game. So like. And because it's not competitive per se, the rules don't need to be as airtight. So a lot of the time, like if you're doing it wrong, you're kind of doing it right anyway, which I think messes with some wargamers' heads because they're like, no, we need to like know what the rule is. We need to do it right, you know?
Yeah.
But also realizing that like D&D is to the tabletop RPG industry what Games Workshop is to the wargaming industry in terms of, you know, that saying of the 10,000 pound gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
There are Warhammer role-playing games based on the Warhammer IP produced by licensed companies. I can't think of what they're called off the top of my head, which might get me in trouble with them. But you can play like a 40K themed tabletop role-playing game where you're playing like an Inquisitor or, you know, an Eldar dude or like a band of Xenos hunters or something like that, or rogue traders. Or there's a Warhammer Fantasy Battle version where you're playing a bunch of, Cities of Sigmar dudes who are wandering around.
HeroQuest?
HeroQuest's a board game. but all very kind of in similar area. You know, it's like one of those dungeon crawling board games like Descent or
because I got around Silver Tower when it came out.
Right. Yeah.
And Curse City, and I absolutely love those. They were so cool.
That was kind of my gateway as well. I got into Imperial Assault, which is basically like a Star Wars themed Curse City.
Right.
I played Blackstone Fortress for a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's heaps of like non D&D role playing options for people who, you know, maybe it's easier because you love the lore of 40k and you know it really well. You don't want to have to learn new lore.
Yeah, the amount of times I played Silver Tower down at Games Workshop, it was like, I reckon it was 3 months every weekend we'd go down, just get all the tiles out and everyone would have a hero and we'd just continue the story. It was so cool.
Yeah, that's sick. That's really cool. Yeah, because that's what I love. I love RPGs, even with my video games and stuff like that. I like, that's why I like Necromunda. Necromunda, you actually work and build up experience on your characters so you can buy new weapons, and I find that cool. So that's why we tried out D&D. So we were going to actually go to that Fortress event because that's that starting one. Yeah. But we didn't have enough tickets left because they'd sold out. So it's obviously popular. So we were doing things like, because in the storybook we had to go into a cave and we fought these little mushroom creatures, and then we were looking at the mushrooms on the wall. You would have beat
the shit out of them, surely.
Yeah, we did. But then I was like, I want to eat the mushroom on the wall.
Yeah.
And the dungeon master pretty much makes the rules up, doesn't he? So he's like,
kinda.
He was like, oh yeah, well, you can eat it, but I told you that it doesn't look edible. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to eat it.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, well, if you eat it, you have to roll a D6 or whatever. And if you don't roll higher than a 3, you get poisoned and you lose a hit point. Is stuff like that right? Or are we just kind of completely...
No, that's completely it. And that's what messes with wargamers' heads, right? Is this idea of making up rules. When I was playing D&D for the first time, there's a concept of difficulty class, your DC, which is what you're rolling that D20 on. If you're making an athletics check, you roll a D20, you add your athletics, which might be like a +6, let's just say, and you're trying to get over 15. And if you roll a 12, +6 is 18, 15, woohoo, I pass the athletics check, right? But how do you know that that specific athletics check you were trying to pass is a 15 in difficulty? The game master just makes it up. He just goes like, that cliff's like 20 feet high, so it's maybe a DC 15, you know? And that really messed with me initially because I was like, no, I want a solid answer. I don't want to know why, like, what different things are meant to represent, you know?
Show me in the rule book where it's 20-foot drop.
See, we were having that. Like, we were reading through certain rules and we're like, is this? But how does that work? Like, what's this stat? Do we use this stat for this, or is this working with that? So we're very loosely learning, I guess. So what is there a way that you would advise people to get into it? Like to understand the rules? Because I'm finding myself, I'm looking at it a bit too much like the Warhammer rules.
So if you're going to play with a group of friends, one person has to be the DM.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's the person that is the person that generally reads the rule book the most.
Yeah.
That's
generally
normally advised if it's the first sort of foray into the hobby. But then I suppose you want someone who's like highly imaginative to also be a DM to come up with scenarios and
I mean there is a lot of like improvisation and like thinking on the fly, especially because it is such an open game and you can be like, this mushroom, is it I don't care, you know. And if there's nothing about mushrooms in the book, the GM just has to go like, oh shit, okay, that mushroom does X amount of damage to you because it's poisonous, you know, and kind of makes it up on the fly. That said, you know, it's all about the style of the group and what the group wants to get out of it. Because there might be groups that like they're not there to mess around and kind of play with whatever. They're there to get in, kill the goblins, get the gold, get out, you know. And so you can play it in that
unless
style.
You're a bard and then
just stand there.
Yeah.
Stand there playing songs. Just going like, all right. But there are also like the advice, I guess, getting into 5th edition D&D in particular, the rules are, there's a lot of rules, but it is that simple, you know, is the advice that I'd give coming from a wargamer background where you're like, well, wait, this can't be that. There has to be an answer to this. And it's like, no, it's super simple. Like just make it up or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
But there are games like Pathfinder that try to be, or there's a new game coming out called the MCDM RPG that do try to be more mechanically kind of robust and feel more tactical and feel more like a war game that a war gamer might be able to bite into and chew on a little bit more and feel like they're doing it right.
Yeah.
Because those games have, D&D, the grapple rule is like, I grab this dude, I roll a dice to see if I can keep him from running away from me, and now I got him grappled. Pathfinder, I've never played Pathfinder, but its reputation is there's 3 pages of rules to grapple someone. What if they're bigger than you? What if they're hanging off a cliff? What if they're, hairy? What if they're like whatever? What if they're wearing spiked armor? And so wargamers might find that more satisfying because there is an answer for everything, whereas in D&D there isn't an answer for everything, which means that it can be a bit open sometimes.
Because we, like I said, we want to go do a class, but even myself and my brother, we were a bit like daunting for us because we're the ones, we want to go there to have fun.
Yeah.
So it's that whole clash of personality. We don't want to upset someone else because they're just like, no, we're here. Like, we want to learn too, but we just want to get this stuff done. Where me and my brother like to have a little bit of a joke and be like, hey, I do want to drink that water. I don't know what it is, but I want to drink it.
I mean, it's that same thing as going to a tournament, and this has been part of the thing that's kept me from going to Warhammer tournaments or war game even Infinity tournaments I've never gone to. And it's that fear of clash of personality, right?
Yeah.
Of like, you don't know who your opponent's going to be. You don't know what sort of army they're bringing. You don't know whether you're going to have a good time. I hear that it's the same in Magic the Gathering circles. People rock up to a Magic the Gathering tournament and they're like, there is a finite amount of fun to be had at this tournament, and I am here to have all of it because I'm going to put each of my opponents into the ground, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of the fear of going to any sort of wargaming tournament or part of it. It's the same going into a public D&D event or going to like a convention like PAX and being like, oh, I'm going to give D&D a go. You don't know who the GM's going to be. You don't know who the other 4 players at the table, if you're with a mate, are going to be. You don't know what they're going to be like, what their priorities are going to be. And so that's just part of the social risk, right? So it's just of going out there. Yeah. And like most D&D games that I've played in public spaces, because I've run games at, Gen Con in America. I've run games at Conquest here and PAX and ArcanaCon when it was on. And most of them, like 90% of them, have been really positive experiences.
Yeah, cool.
You do have some that are like, but it's like that wargamer. You rock up, he starts unpacking his army, and you're like, oh no, this is gonna be an hour and a half. Let me tell you, this is gonna be the longest hour and a half of this weekend.
Damn, what's your name? You're wearing a Team Vic top. Lockie, is it? Shit. This is going to go quick. So, future plans. What's in the future for Ghostfire Gaming? What's in the future for Ben? What's coming up?
What's coming up? Well, next at Ghostfire, going back to Gen Con, which I'm excited about, which is coming up in August, which is a big gaming convention, biggest gaming convention in the US. I don't get to see much of the wargaming that happens there, but this year I might try and float around to see what GW are up to. Then we've got a couple of others coming up later in the year, and we've got our new Kickstarter coming in October, which is the new Grim Hollow Kickstarter. So if you're into D&D and dark fantasy and having a bad time, so to speak, which, you're into Warhammer, you're into folks having a bad time in law. So that's exciting. And then more from a hobby side of things, I don't know. We'll see what happens when I finish painting these Tau. It'll either be more Tau, it'll be the other Combat Patrol box, so I can continue to kind of shake it up Combat Patrol style, but I've got the beginnings of a full army, or I'll grab the Necrons, and I have a kit bash idea where I've seen this go well, but I've also seen this go bad online, which is the classic Nighthaunt Necron kit bash. I've kind of got some ideas of things I want to do. I love the shaped cloth of the Nighthaunts where you don't see the skull, you just see the impression of the skull.
Yeah. There's a guy that I might forward you his profile on Instagram if I find it. He does Adeptus Mechanicus.
I think I know the profile.
Oh my
it looks so good.
God.
There's one, it's like a stilt walker dude.
Yeah.
And he's got him rotating and he's grabbed like the soundtrack from Dune or something and thrown it on there. And every time I watch that little clip, I get pumped and I'm like, yes, I want to do this, but Necrons. For some reason, it looks amazing unfailingly with Adeptus Mechanicus. It's a bit hit and miss with the Necrons, and I think it's because the size of a GW skull compared to a Necron head is different. People think they're the same size, but when I've seen Necrons with like humanoid skulls put on, the skull looks too small.
Yep.
And when you see Necrons kind of put into Night Haunts, the skull doesn't quite fit inside the hood. So I think that's as long as I'm not trying to like swap the skulls out, I think I should be okay. In theory, but we'll see.
Cool.
And Mark, more just the batch painting.
Yeah,
the torturous.
I'll focus on the batch painting first. I have been looking at. I've got a lot of boxes of Tyranids that I bought as a bundle, so I'm not really looking at purchasing anything else yet. I'm trying to have that self-control. Even though I love looking at other models. Yes. But yeah, the batch painting of my 50 battle line units, because then after I have completed those, I think I have 5 more models after those, and then I'll have my army ready for the battle reports.
How good's that? Yeah. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. It is exciting. So it's been a bit of a journey, but
it's been a big journey because when we were hobbying together, like you said, you were chopping and changing armies.
Oh yeah.
The ADHD was
strong. Yeah,
was strong at that point. So like, probably I don't say it often enough, but I'm actually pretty proud of what you've done in terms of sticking to some Tyranids and getting towards that 1350, because then the next point for the 650 to get 2,000 points isn't that far.
No, not at all. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. Watching how you do things as well has helped a lot, because I paint the same as you. I'm not going to be doing my batch painting with them in pieces. I'm going to glue majority of the parts together because I can access most of it with the models. But painting my models in pieces where I can have them separated has helped, because I used to get overwhelmed, I think, because I used to just build everything and then paint it. So having 100 different models from different armies in front of me, I couldn't focus with my ADHD, because I'd be like, oh yeah, I feel like painting that today, and I'd start, and you'd get like the base coat of one done, and it's like, I've got 99 left on my desk that I got to paint. Like it just got too much. Where hey, I can just go turn on my Xbox and I can finish a game in a couple of hours. Whereas now, because I'm painting models, getting them finished, and I've got them sitting on my desk, as that collection keeps growing, it's more motivating.
You got to get the ball rolling. Like it's self-motivating.
Yeah, 100%.
It really is.
That's why I'm like not buying anymore until these tower done, is because it feels like a moving rock, you know, sliding down a hill. And I don't want to put the handbrake on that, you know, as I feel the tower army kind of growing.
Oh, definitely. Because like I said, I've literally behind my desk got like 13 boxes of unopened Tyranids. Yeah. And I know that if I was to just open them, I would overwhelm myself.
Yes.
And because I don't want to play with grey models either. I'm the same.
Sure.
I used to play with grey models, and I know when I go to some places and I can hear people playing, if I go look at the table and the models are grey, I don't even go and have a look and see how they're playing or how they're playing, because it just doesn't appeal to me. It just looks like blobs of grey, especially if it's an army that I know nothing about. And he's like, hey, yeah, I know what Terminators are, but for someone that doesn't, hey, my Terminators are attacking. It's like, which ones are the Terminators? Because they all look the same.
That was, not to call anyone out here, but that was like a bad experience playing Infinity I had. Not a bad experience, but just like not an ideal experience. Was you've got bikes in like literal motorbikes, and then you've got drones, kind of robots that are on a same base size.
Yeah.
And this dude rocked up. He was testing his army to see if he wanted to play it at a tournament. So fair enough. He wanted to see if it played well before he committed. But it was just this play experience where like a bike, unpainted, not even a rider, not anything else, kind of pinned to an upside down base, was not a bike. It was a drone that he hit, you know, and this was that, and everything. It was just all over the shop. No board readability whatsoever for me, like coming over and looking. I had to ask constantly, wait, what's that meant to be? What is this? What is that?
Yeah, it does make things very difficult for sure.
And because what, like, we're wanting to achieve with the battle reports for BFG as well. It's good if you've got like we're never ever going to paint with play with grey models, but at least that way, you know, if I've got warriors that only have swords, you can literally turn around and say, hey, that's the guys with the swords. These are the warriors. That's what I'm shooting with. Even if you're not physically there, then your eyes can still go to that model if it's got a definitive feature.
Sure.
Whereas when it's grey, it's like, which guys is that? Oh yeah, the one's over in the back left. But if you've got 4 squads over in the back left, which one is it? Like,
Yeah.
So
I think that about wraps things up.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Ben.
What have you got
for coming
going on now?
Me?
What's in the future for
God,
you?
people, it's past 4 podcasts. I think it's been Imperial Nights. So yeah, I'll be finishing the second Imperial Night very shortly. I think probably in the next 2 or 3 days from this podcast.
Okay.
And then community voted on stream. I'm pretty sure I'll be painting a Land Raider. So
Okay.
they were given 3 options: Terminators, Aggressors, or Land Raiders, and they had to vote. And Land Raider is leading by a mile, which, you know, I'm going to paint them all eventually anyway, but having the community pick is pretty fun. So
Maybe a gold dread.
no gold dread. Gold captain. I'll paint a gold captain.
Is a tank easier to paint than like a walker? Because I've just finished a ghost kill and I'm like, could I do a devilfish? Would that be easier?
I think in terms of the detail, Devilfish have got a lot less than a ghost kill. So I think
Sure.
you would do a Devilfish a bit quicker. Space Marine ones, depends how you paint them. I spent a lot of streams painting some black edge highlights on some grav pads. The grav pad saga of 2023
Yes.
took a long time. So yeah, it just depends on the
How
amount
much
of detail.
detail,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
sure.
Devilfish though, less edge highlights, flatter panels. So doing your stippling and stuff, I feel like
yeah.
you probably do want a bit quicker.
Yeah. But you're relieved to be going to Land Raider as opposed to
I'm
Knight.
going to be. I'll enjoy getting back to the Blood Angels.
Sure.
It'd be nice to get back to the Blood Angels. I enjoyed painting the Knights. I would enjoy painting Dreadnoughts more because it's for my Blood Angels. But yeah, it'd be good to be back to the Angels.
Sure.
Yeah. So that is all from us, guys. Like I said, thank you, Ben.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, BFG Mark. And
welcome.
we will catch you on the next podcast. I believe Ash, who was the guest that was meant to be on 19, should be on episode 21. Fingers crossed.
Has he
Fingers
got the
crossed.
right day? You're gonna have to make sure.
I've
it's
given him the
right
day multiple times and said Saturday, so we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. Again, I forgot to say, I think like, share, and subscribe.
Yep.
But you've made it all the way to the end of the podcast, so you'll see this as well. Take it easy, guys.
Thanks, everyone.